If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA president who thinks she owns everything you've worked hard for, you're going to love this story, so make sure you subscribe right now, because what happened to me will blow your mind. The HOA president tried to throw me off my own property for the sake of her special guests, but she never expected the police would show up and kick her out instead, and the way it all unfolded still makes the neighbors talk about it today. I never thought moving into what looked like a perfect neighborhood would turn into a saga that felt like something out of a reality TV show, but that's exactly what happened the day the HOA president decided she could treat me like some sort of trespasser on my own land, and it all started with what I thought was going to be a quiet Saturday morning. I was out in my front yard, trimming the hedges and planning to set up the grill later because my cousin was coming over with his kids, when I noticed a convoy of expensive SUVs slowly rolling down the street as if some celebrity was arriving, and to my shock, they all stopped right in front of my house. Out steps Linda, the infamous HOA president, dressed in an oversized sun hat and pearls that made her look like she thought she was royalty, and she strutted up my driveway without even acknowledging me, barking orders to her husband to direct the cars into my driveway. Yes, my driveway, as though I didn't exist. Confused, I asked what was going on, and that's when she turned, gave me this condescending smirk, and said, "We have important guests visiting today, and since your house is the least impressive on the block, we need to use your space for extra parking, so please leave and stay away for the afternoon." And I swear I almost laughed because I thought she was joking, but her expression was stone cold serious. I told her plainly, "This is my property, and you can't just take over my driveway or tell me to leave." But that's when she raised her voice loud enough for her friends to hear, shouting that I was being uncooperative and disrespectful to the community, and before I knew it, several of the guests were glaring at me like I was the one being unreasonable. One man even told me to be a good neighbor and let them use the space because they were here on business, which made no sense to me at all. So I held my ground and said, "No, you can't park here." And that's when Linda completely snapped, wagging her finger in my face and threatening to fine me through the wall for noncompliance with community spirit, which was the most ridiculous phrase I'd ever heard. Still, when I refused, she pulled out her phone and declared she was calling the HOA board to deal with me, but what she didn't know was that I had been documenting her harassment for weeks because she had previously complained about the color of my shutters, the type of flowers I planted, and even the way I parked my own truck in my own driveway. So I calmly pulled out my own phone and started recording, which only made her angrier, and she began screaming about how I was harassing her guests, and how she would have me removed from the property. Things escalated quickly when one of her so-called important guests, a man in a tailored suit who looked like he thought he owned the world, actually tried to step onto my porch as if to usher me inside like some sort of prisoner in my own home, and that's when I said, "That's enough, I'm calling the police," which made Linda's face turn beet red. She shouted that I had no right to involve the authorities and that I was embarrassing her in front of her guests, but I had already dialed 911 and explained that strangers were trespassing and threatening me on my property. The dispatcher assured me officers were on the way, and as soon as Linda overheard that, she panicked and tried to spin the story to her guests, saying, "Don't worry, I know the police chief personally, this will be handled," but you could see the cracks forming in her confidence. Meanwhile, I kept recording, documenting every insult and every command she hurled at me, and when the police finally arrived, 2 squad cars pulling up with lights flashing, the scene looked like something out of a drama show. Neighbors peeking through their blinds, kids whispering on bikes, and the officers stepping out with that no-nonsense posture that meant they weren't here to play games. Linda rushed up to them first, waving her arms and yelling about how I was being belligerent and refusing to leave for community guests, but the officers gave her this confused look, then walked over to me, and when I calmly explained that this was my property and I was being told to leave it so the HOA president could host some kind of event, their jaws practically dropped. One officer asked Linda point blank, "Ma'am, are you seriously telling us you ordered this homeowner to leave his own property?" And instead of backing down, she doubled down, insisting that, as HOA president, I have authority over communal appearances and usage, which made both officers actually chuckle in disbelief. One of them asked her, "Do you understand how property ownership works?" And when she continued to argue, trying to hand them some printed HOA bylaws like they were law enforcement documents, the officer finally said, "Ma'am, If you and your guests don't leave this man's property immediately, we're going to have to remove you for trespassing. And I will never forget the look on her face. Her jaw dropped, her hands trembled, and the fake confidence drained out of her like water from a broken bucket. Her guests started murmuring, clearly embarrassed, and one by one, they shuffled back to their expensive SUVs, while Linda kept sputtering about how unfair this was. But the officers didn't care. They told her firmly, "This is not your property. You have no authority here, and if you set foot on his driveway again without permission, you will be charged." And then, as if to add insult to injury, they made her step off my property before even addressing me again. And when they did, they reassured me that I had every right to call them and that people like her often overstep their boundaries. But it still felt surreal watching the mighty HOA president reduced to a stammering mess on the sidewalk while her guests drove away. You'd think the story would end there. But no, because the very next day, Linda launched a smear campaign against me, sending emails to the entire neighborhood accusing me of humiliating her and endangering community relations by involving the police. But to her shock, the video I recorded went viral among neighbors after I shared it in the community Facebook group, and suddenly the tide turned against her. People who had been quietly fed up with her controlling behavior finally spoke up, sharing their own stories of her harassment, from petty fines to threats about yard decorations, and within a week, there was a petition to have her removed as HOA president. She tried everything to cling to power, even claimed the video was doctored, but the evidence was too overwhelming, and when the board finally voted, she was ousted in a landslide, replaced by a more reasonable neighbor who actually believed in community rather than dictatorship. The sweetest part came when I saw her one last time, packing her belongings into a moving truck after putting her house on the market, glaring at me with pure hatred. But I just smiled, waved, and thought about how sometimes standing your ground, documenting the truth, and refusing to be bullied is all it takes to turn the tables completely. And every time I walk up my driveway now, I can't help but remember the day the HOA president demanded I leave for her guests, and ended up being the one kicked off my property by the cops, a story that still makes me laugh every single time I tell it.